Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. So the last class we took the statement of the author alayhi rahmatullah, where he said, وَالْقُرْآنُ كَلَامُ اللَّهِ وَتَنْزِيلُهُ وَنُورُهُ. The statement of the author alayhi rahmatullah, Imam al-Barbahārī, where he said, the Qur'an is the speech of Allah, His revelation and His light. وَلَيْسَ مَخْلُوقًا, and it is not created. لِأَنَّ الْقُرْآنَ مِنَ اللَّهِ, and this is because the Qur'an is from Allah, meaning that it's one of the attributes of Allah. وَمَا كَانَ مِنَ اللَّهِ فَلَيْسَ بِمَخْلُوقٍ, and whatever is from Allah, meaning it's one of His attributes, then it cannot be created. وَهَكَذَا قَالَ مَالِكُ بْنُ أَنَسٍ وَأَحْمَدُ بْنُ حَنْبَلٍ رَحِمَهُمُ اللَّهِ, and this was stated also by Imam Malik ibn Anas and Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahumullah, may Allah have mercy upon them. وَمَنْ قَبْلَهُمَا مِنَ الْفُقَهَاءِ وَمَنْ بَعْدَهُمَا, and likewise the scholars who came before them as well as after them. وَالْمِرَاءُ فِيهِ كُفْرٌ, and to dispute concerning this affair is disbelief. So as we mentioned last class, the belief of Ahl-Sunnah wal Jama'ah as it relates to the Qur'an, the speech of Allah, is that it is what? Not created. In the last class, Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan, he mentioned a number of groups who hold the belief that the Qur'an is created. For those who are here, who can mention a few of them? Some of the groups that hold the belief that the Qur'an is created. Al-Mu'tazila, al-Jahmiya. So the first of which is al-Jahmiya, and their founder is who? Al-Jahm ibn Safwan. And this is what you find with Ahlul Bid'ah in general. Their group is named after their leader, is named after the founder of the group. So Al-Jahm, that's his first name, so they're called therefore what? Al-Jahmiyyah. Nisba ilayhi, it's a ascription to him. And this is not the case with Ahl-Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Right? Ahl-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, your ascription is to what? The Qur'an and the Sunnah, the Jama'ah, right? The Muslims as a whole. It's not like Ahlul Bid'ah. But this is one of the groups. Al-Jahmiyyah, Al-Mu'tazila. What else? Some other groups. He didn't mention the Qadiri. He didn't mention them. Naam, the Shia, Al-Zaydiyah. He mentioned Al-Zaydiyah as well. Naam, Al-Ibadiyah. And we said Al-Ibadiyah, they're a sect from the Khawarij. They're a sect of the Khawarij. So all of them, they hold this belief from these different sects that the Qur'an is created. And we've already mentioned the reason why this is not correct. Because the Qur'an is the speech of Allah. So therefore the speech of Allah is a sifa, is an attribute. So it cannot be created. It cannot be created. Perhaps some of the people who have doubts, or they might be upon innovation, they might say, the Mus'haf, are you telling me that that Mus'haf right there that's on the bookshelf is not created? We say that's created. But the Qur'an that was revealed to Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is not created. It's not created. So this is a standpoint that some people who have doubts, or they might try to argue in terms of falsehood, they might try to bring a doubt like that. You're telling me that this Mus'haf or this Qur'an that's on the shelf is not created? No one's arguing with regard to that. We're talking about the speech of Allah that was revealed to Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. It's not created. It's an attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we mentioned some of the verses which clearly state that the speech of Allah is an attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's no way that it can be misconstrued. The verse, for example, that we mentioned, يُرِيدُونَ أَن يُبَدِّلُوا كَلَامَ اللَّهِ. They want to change the speech of Allah. How can a person come with another type of interpretation and say that the speech of Allah means something else? Tonight we're going to take another very beneficial point, and this is used by Ahlul Bid'ah. And they try to justify this to say that the kalam of Allah is created. So Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan, he says, وَأَمَّا قَوْلُ أَهْلُ الضَّلَالِ أَنَّ إِضَافَتَهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ مِنْ إِضَافَةِ الْمَخْلُوقِ إِلَى خَالِقِهِ. So as for the statement of Ahlul Dalal, the people of misguidance, the people of innovation, and they say that attaching the speech of Allah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is from the standpoint of attaching the creation to its creator. Mithlu, and he gives an example. Naqatillah wa baytillah. Right? Naqatillah, which is what? The she-camel of Allah. This was a sign that was sent to which prophet? Salih alayhi salam. Naqatullah. And we're going to explain what the purpose of this in the Arabic language. Naqatillah wa baytillah, the house of Allah, the masjid. This is referring to the masjid. فنقول هذا من الافتراء والتلبيس. So Ahlul Bid'ah, Ahlul Dalal, the people of misguidance, the people of innovation who try to say that the Quran is created and they try to use this as an argument. He says, Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan, this is fabrication and this is deception. To say that the speech of Allah, the same way that is being used in these examples, Naqatullah or Baytullah, Kalamullah, is the same thing. That's not the case. هذا من الافتراء والتلبيس. This is fabrication and it's deception. فالمضاف إلى الله قسمان. فالمضاف إلى الله قسمان. Pay attention to this point. Pay attention to this point. So when it comes to attaching something to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it's of two categories. الأول إضافة معان. The first is with regard to meanings. To attach something, يعني إضافة معان, when it comes to meanings. الثاني إضافة أعيان. And the second is when it comes to attaching something to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. المعاني إضافتها إلى الله إضافة صفة إلى موصوف. So the first is al-ma'ani. So we said meanings, with regard to meanings, and he's going to explain what this means. So it means that the attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is attached to him. Yani it's attached to the one who's being described, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His attribute is attached to him. وَهِيَ إِضَافَةٌ حَقِيقِيَّةٌ. And this is an attachment that is real. It is in a real sense, or a literal sense. فَهِيَ مِن صِفَاتِهِ. So therefore, it's one of his attributes. كَالْكَلَامِ. For example, such as speech. وَالسَّمْعِ. And hearing. وَالْبَصَرِ. And seeing. This is the first type. وَعَلَيْكُمُ السَّلَامُ. وَإِضَافَةُ الْأَعْيَانِ. And the second is إِضَافَةُ الْأَعْيَانِ. When it comes to attaching things to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. كَالنَّاقَةِ وَالْبَيْتِ. So for example, like a she-camel or a house. And we already gave these examples. أَتَى أَمْرُ اللَّهِ. The commandment of Allah has come. From this standpoint. He says, هَذِهِ إِضَافَةُ مَخْلُوقٍ إِلَى خَالِقِهِ. So this is attaching something that's created to the creator. In the Arabic language, this is called إِضَافَةُ تَشْرِيف. إِضَافَةُ تَشْرِيف. This is to attach, this is an attachment of honor. This is an attachment of honor. So for example, what we already previously stated, Naqatullah, the she-camel of Allah. This was a sign that was sent to the Prophet Salih alayhi salam. So this is an attachment to show honor. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored this she-camel. It was a sign that was sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Baytullah, the house of Allah. Right? The houses of Allah, the masajid. This is an attachment of honor. These are honorable places. So it's attached to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from this standpoint. He says, with regard to Ahlul Bid'ah, فَهُمْ خَلَطُوا بَيْنَ الْأَمْرَيْنِ. So they mixed between both of these affairs. وَلَمْ يُفَرِّقُوا بَيْنَ هَذَا وَهَذَا. And they didn't distinguish between this one and the other. Meaning the first category and the second type. وَلِذَلِكَ نَصَّ أَهْلُ السُّنَّةِ وَالْجَمَاعَةِ عَلَى هَذِهِ الْمَسْأَلَةِ فِي كُتُبِ الْعَقَائِدِ لِيَرُدُّوا عَلَى أَهْلِ الضَّلَالِ. And this is why the scholars of Ahlus-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, they mention this issue in the books of creed to refute the people of misguidance. وَإِذَا كَانَ اللَّهُ لَيْسَ لَهُ كَلَامٌ كَمَا يَزْعُمُونَ فَكَيْفَ يَأْمُرُ وَيَنْهَى. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't speak as they claim, then how could He command and forbid? Just think about it. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala truly did not speak as these individuals claim, then how could Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala command us to do things and forbid us from doing things? وَهَذَا مَعْنَاهُ أَنَّهَا تَتَعَطَّلُ الْأَحْكَامُ الشَّرْعِيَّةِ. And this implies that the rulings of the religion have ceased to exist. They come to an end. وَيَنْهَدِمُ أَصْلُ الْأُصُولِ وَهُوَ الْقُرْآنِ. And the origin of this affair, which is the Quran, it's destroyed. فَإِذَا انْهَدَمَ هَذَا الْأَصْلِ انْهَدَمَ الْإِسْلَامِ. And if this origin or this foundation, which is the Quran, is destroyed, the entirety of the religion of Islam is destroyed. وَلَكِنْ هُمْ يَلُوذُونَ بِالتَّنْزِيهِ. However, these people, the people of innovation, they resort to a tanzih. So a tanzih, it means that they're trying to make Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala far above from having any type of imperfections. This is what's intended by a tanzih. وَلَيْسَ هَذَا هُوَ التَّنْزِيهِ. And this is not a tanzih. This is not making Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala far above from having imperfections. هَذَا تَعْطِيلٌ. Right? This is distorting the names and the attributes. وَفَرْقٌ بَيْنَ التَّعْطِيلِ وَبَيْنَ التَّنْزِيهِ. التَّنْزِيهِ هُوَ الَّذِي ذَكَرَهُ اللَّهُ بِقَوْلِهِ لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. And the difference between the two, التَّعْطِيل. Remember these terms. التَّعْطِيل is to distort the meanings of the names and the attributes. And a tanzih is what we just said it, to make Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala perfect. And He's free of any type of deficiencies or imperfections. The difference between the two, he says a tanzih is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned with His statement, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. There's nothing that's like Him. هَلْ تَعْلَمُ لَهُ سَمِيًّا. And He mentions another verse, is there anything that's like Him? Meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. نعم. هذا هو التنزيه الذي ذكره الله وهو نفي أن يشبه المخلوق بالخالق. So this is a tanzih which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned. And this is to negate that the creation resembles the creator. أو يساوى المخلوق بالخالق. Or that the creation and the creator are the same. هذا هو الذي ينزه الله جل وعلا عنه. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is far above. He's far above this and He's free of this. أما نفي الصفات فهذا تعطيل ناشئ عن التشبيه. As for negating the attributes of Allah, then this is ta'atil. We already said what that is. What is ta'atil? To distort the meanings and the attributes. He says this results from a tashbih, by making the attributes of Allah similar to the creation. فَهُمْ شَبَّهُ أَوَّلًا. So the people of innovation, what did they do? First, they made the attributes of Allah in the creation similar to one another. ثُمَّ عَطَّلُوا ثَانِيًا. And then secondly, they did what? They distorted the names and the attributes. They did two things. وَلَيْسَ تَنْزِيهًا. And this is not tanzih. This is not making Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala free of having imperfections or deficiencies. فَفَرْقٌ بَيْنَ التَّنْزِيهِ وَتَعْطِيلِ. So there's a difference between the two, between a tanzih and a ta'atil. جاءت الأشاعرة بشيء عجيب أعجب من قول الجهمية. So the Asha'ira, this is another deviant sect. He said they came with something that's even more amazing than what the Jahmiyyah said. And we already said who the Jahmiyyah are. The Jahmiyyah, they're the people who follow Al-Jahm ibn Safwan. They said the Quran is created. We mentioned a number of their deviations, right? He said this group, the Ash'ariyah, they said something that's even more astonishing than the Jahmiyyah. فَقَالُوا كَلَامُ اللَّهِ يَنْقَسِمُ إِلَى قِسْمَيْنِ. They said the speech of Allah, it divides into two categories. مَعَانٍ وَأَلْفَاظ. Right? Meanings and expressions. Meanings and expressions. Al-ma'ani hiya kalamullah. So they say the meanings is the speech of Allah. Pay attention to this. Pay attention. Al-ma'ani hiya kalamullah. So the meanings of it is the speech of Allah. Wallahu yulsafu bi anna lahu kalaman wa huwa al-ma'na al-qadim al-qa'imu bi nafsi. Alright, so they say, the Ash'ariyah, that the speech of Allah is ma'ani, it's meanings. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is described as having speech, and it is an ancient meaning, for lack of better translation. Al-ma'na al-qadim is an ancient meaning. Al-qa'imu bi nafsi, it's established by itself. Amma inna Allah يتكلم بحرف وبصوت فهذا منفي عندهم عن الله. As for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually speaking with letters and with a voice, then this is something that they negate from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks, but it's ma'ani. It's ma'ani. It's only the meanings of it. He's not actually speaking. وَيَقُولُونَ هُوَ مَعْنًا قائم بنفسه سبحانه وتعالى. And his speech is a meaning that's established by itself. وَأَمَّا اللَّفْظُ فَهُوَ كَلَامُ الْمَخْلُوقِ. Pay attention to this. They say that the lafz, or the wording of it, the expression, it is a statement of someone that's created. It's a statement of someone who's created. أي هو من كلام جبريل أو من كلام محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. So really, pay attention to this. So they're saying that the Quran that we read, they say the meaning of it came from Allah, but the wording came from either Jibreel or Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You with me? So it's not real. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really didn't say the Quran. He didn't reveal the Quran from the standpoint that He really spoke with it. They're saying the meaning of it is from Allah, but the actual al-lafdhu, right, the wording of it came from Jibreel or Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. فَجَعَلُوا الْقُرْآنَ مُكَوَّنًا مِنْ شَيْئِينَ. So they made the Quran consist of two things. They made the Quran consist of two things. مِنْ مَخْلُوقٍ وَغَيْرِ مَخْلُوقٍ. Something that's created and something that's not created. فَلَا هُمْ صَارُوا مَعَ أَهْلِ السُّنَّةِ وَقَالُوا الْقُرْآنِ غَيْرُ مَخْلُوقٍ. So they're not with Ahl Sunnah, who say that the Quran is not created. وَلَا هُمْ صَارُوا مَعَ الْجَهْمِيَّةِ وَقَالُوا الْقُرْآنِ كُلُّهُ مَخْلُوقٍ. And likewise, they're not with the Jahmiyyah, who say that all of the Quran is created. كَانُوا مُذَبْذَبِينَ. Right there, they waver in between both of these affairs. مِثْلُ مَقَالَةِ النَّصَارَى فِي الْمَسِيحِ. And this is similar to what the Christians say regarding Isa alayhi salam. أَنَّهُ مُكَوَّنٌ مِنْ شَيْئَيْنِ. Right, they say that he is composed, or he comes from two things. He consists of two things. مِنَ اللَّهُوتِ وَالنَّاسُوتِ. Right? So Allahut is like to be divine. To be divine. وَالنَّاسُوتِ is to be human. So they're saying he's God and he's human at the same time. Right? That's what the Christians say. وَيَقُولُونَ اتَّحَدَ اللَّهُوتِ بِالنَّاسُوتِ. And they say that, this God and this human, they merge together, or they united together. And of course, when it comes to the Christians, they have different denominations. Most of them, they believe in what they call it, the Father, the Son, the Trinity. Most of them they believe in the Trinity. And throughout the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He refutes this creed of the Christians. A number of verses come to mind. Allah Jalla wa Ala said, قُلْ إِن كَانَ لِلرَّحْمَنِ وَلَدٌ فَأَنَا أَوَّلُ الْعَابِدِينَ. Say, if the Most Merciful had a son, then I'm the first to worship. The scholars of tafsir, they mention, some of them mention two possible interpretations of this verse. قُلْ إِن كَانَ لِلرَّحْمَنِ وَلَدٌ فَأَنَا أَوَّلُ الْعَابِدِينَ. Some of them say that it's possible this verse can mean فَأَنَا أَوَّلُ عَابِدِينَ لِلَّهِ. I'm the first to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If Allah had a son, then I'm the first to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He doesn't have a son. Another possible interpretation of this verse, قُلْ إِن كَانَ لِلرَّحْمَنِ وَلَدٌ فَأَنَا أَوَّلُ الْعَابِدِينَ. If the Most Merciful had a son, then I'm the first to worship that son. If that was the case, then after that verse, what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? سُبْحَانَ رَبِّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ رَبِّ الْعَرْشِ عَمَّا يَصِفُونَ. Glorified and exalted is the Lord of the heavens and the earth, and the Lord of the throne, عَمَّا يَصِفُونَ, from what they attribute to Him. So this shows what? It's not befitting for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have a son. It's not befitting that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a son. And likewise Allah Jalla wa Ala said, مَا اتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ مِنْ وَلَدٍ وَمَا كَانَ مَعَهُ مِنْ إِلَهٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not take a son or a child, and there was no God that was with Him. There was no deity that was with Him. إِذَا لَذَهَبَ كُلُّ إِلَهٍ بِمَا خَلَقَ وَلَعَلَى بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. If that was the case, لو فرض, right, in the Arabic language, if that was the case, if there was another God with Allah, then each God would take away what the other God created. And some of them would try to overpower the other. And we mentioned this example before. In Greek mythology, right, with Zeus, Hercules, and all these made up false gods, right? How do they always portray them? They're always fighting one another. If there were multiple gods and they had divinity, they're God, right? They have, basically, they can do whatever they want to do, then they would be constantly trying to fight another God. They're trying to overpower him, take what he has, take his dominion, take what he created. This is what they would be doing. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions. If that was the case, it would be like that. But do you see in this dunya any type of, chaos? We see chaos, but it's from us. But I'm talking about in terms of this cone, in terms of the universe. Every time you wake up, you see the sun rising. In the evening time, you see the sun setting, right? You see the birds flying in the sky, singing or whatever the case is, making that sound that they make, right? It's too much peace. It's too much tranquility and peace in this dunya for there to be more than one God. It's impossible. There's only one deity, and He is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Subhanallahi amma yasifun. Glorified and exalted is Allah, far above what they ascribe to Him. So this concept of the Trinity, it can be destroyed, just using verses from the Quran, or even using the verses from their own book. Their book has numerous contradictions, and this is why you find, alhamdulillah, many people who leave Christianity and they become Muslim because it wasn't making sense. Right? Perhaps the vast majority of the brothers here who embrace Islam, you were Christian prior to becoming Muslim, right? So this is, alhamdulillah, this is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it such that people are waking up and they're realizing that, this book that the people call the Bible or the Injil today has been corrupted, and people have distorted it, and they have made up fabrications and lied against Allah Azza wa Jal. Na'am. So inshallah we'll suffice with this for tonight.
There is another two ayat. شهد الله أنه لا إله إلا هو وقال الله لا تتخذوا إلهين اثنين.
نعم. الآيات كثيرة. نعم. There's many verses with regard to this. Say again?
Surah Al-Kahf, in the beginning, right? Like the fourth verse. And to warn those who say Allah has taken a son.
نعم. There's many verses. No. And this is, as we approach, Christmas, another week and a half or whatever the case is. And, some of us, we might have relatives that are not Muslim or whatever the case is. This belief or this notion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a son, this is the whole basis of this holiday. And perhaps some of us, our relatives, they might try to invite us to eat some food or whatever the case is. As a Muslim, you have to be firm. You have to be firm because you have to realize that the whole basis of them doing these things is they're celebrating what they deem to be the birthday of God or the Son of God, whatever the case is. So it's not permissible for a Muslim to participate in this. Allah Jalla wa Ala, He mentioned, وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَشْهَدُونَ الزُّورِ, and those who do not bear witness to falsehood. They do not bear witness to falsehood. Some of the mufassirun, the scholars of tafsir, they mention لا يحضرون أعياد المشركين. They say what's intended by this verse is they do not attend the festivities of the mushrikun. So their holidays, whether it's Christmas, even Kwanzaa, right? Just made up stuff. They might say there's no connection to a religion or anything like it. It's not permissible. We only have 2 a'yad. We only have 2 Eids. Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. That's it. Now, سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.